This is a 1977 Suzuki GS550. Today I want to give you guys a little bit of a review of the GS550 and kind of everything that you might need to know about them and what they're actually like to own, ride, enjoy. These bikes are pretty obtainable. I saw a very clean one sell for about $2,200 to $2,500 a couple of months ago. The GS550 first came out in 1977. It was the smaller version of the GS750. They've been testing the GS750 since 1974 on and off, but 77 was also the first year that the 750 officially came into market and you could go buy them at the dealerships. Both the 750 and the 550 had dual overhead cams. This bike was the smaller version, obviously, of the 750, just like Honda, how they had their CB750, their CB500, and CB550, and this was kind of like that version that Honda had of their bike. However, this one is a lot faster, came out later, and was a very good machine, just like the Honda was. The GS750 looked so similar to Kawasaki's KZ900 and Z1, they actually had to change the top end of the motors cosmetically in order to make them look different, because Suzuki basically copied Kawasaki to a T, and this was the miniature version of it. This bike revs out to 9,500 RPM and produces 49 horsepower at 9,000 RPM. At 8,000 RPM, this bike produces 29 foot-pounds of torque, and this bike weighs 415 pounds. There was a couple of different versions of this motorcycle. There was the standard, which is what is standing in front of me. There was the E model, and there was the T model. There was also an L model, but the L and the T are the same, just in different countries they call them different things. The L and T models came out later, and those were more of the cruiser style. They had a little bit of a higher handlebar. The foot pegs were set a little bit forward to be a little bit more comfortable for longer rides. The standard model, which is in front of me, has a different exhaust, and it has the spoke wheels, which more commonly were not seen on the E model. The E model was a more sporty version with commonly seen alloy wheels and a different exhaust system to make it sound a little bit louder. The bikes had minimal differences between them in reality. They just kind of had a little bit of different trim options. Now, even though this is only a 550, those dual overhead cams produce a ton of horsepower and it feels a lot bigger than it is. I was thoroughly impressed with Suzuki and the GS550. This is the first Suzuki I've ever had, and it's been a real pleasure to own, I won't lie. This bike also has what I think were taken stylistic cues of the Water Buffalo. The tank kind of reminds me of the tank of the Water Buffalo in almost like a mini way, but also if you look at this rear tail, it reminds me exactly of the Z1 or the KZ900. Suzuki, Kawasaki, they took huge influences from each other, and Honda, Yamaha at the time, to produce basically what is known as the universal motorcycle. This was one of those that is basically the ideal motorcycle. When you think of motorcycle in your head, this is kind of what you think of. The 70s, 80s Japanese bikes that kind of set its standard at the time. This bike has a 6-speed transmission. It has a gear indicator. Yeah, it tells you what gear you're in, even though most of them have failed over time. My specific bike has 22,613 miles on it right now. You get a single disc brake in the front and a drum brake in the rear, which is more than enough stopping power to get this 550 to a halt. The GS550 was known for a couple of things. The biggest thing that it was known for was its reliability, durability, and also being incredibly smooth. That 4-cylinder dual overhead cam produces minimal vibration and honestly is a pleasure to ride. And the bike was also praised for a suspension setup, which remains to still be true today, and it rides incredible. Suzuki made a really impressive machine that I think is incredibly underrated. I think the 550 and the 750 should be a little bit more expensive and should get a little bit more love, and they're starting to get a little bit more love than they were in the past. The Hondas and Kawasaki's went up like crazy in value, while the Suzuki 4-strokes never really hit their stride. And now I think people are starting to appreciate what these bikes are, because they really are phenomenal machines. I can't wait to own and ride a 750. Hopefully it'll happen in the near future here after I sell this one. And if it's just as good as this bike but a little bigger and a little faster, I would have no complaint whatsoever. This one pops over with no issues. I say we take it out for a little ride and see what it's made of. Also, when you are kicking these bikes, this foot peg does not fold down, and it's not a fun time. I accidentally did that yesterday. Lesson learned. All right, let's take this Suzuki off for a little ride here. I'm not sure if I'm gonna get any lights, which might be a little tricky because I don't have a battery in it. But a couple videos ago, we actually did take this bike out for a little ride around the block. But since we're doing a review, we can't do a review without talking about review things on bikes, on how it feels to ride. This bike is a 6-speed, but my only gripe about the 6-speed is the fact that the gears are so close together. Like, that's 5th, 6th, and 5th right there. They're basically identically close. I wish there's a little bit more of like an overdrive in 6th, but in a 5-speed you get this feeling of, oh, I want another gear, right? But with the 6-speed you definitely don't feel like you need another gear. Overall, this bike is dumb, right? It's dumb how smooth it is. Because when you ride old vintage bikes, most of the time, you get a lot of vibrations in your hands, in your feet, and you feel the bike everywhere. I'm not wearing my riding gloves or any type of hand protection right now, which usually I would, but we're just going out for a gentle little cruise, and I just want to reflect the fact that my hands have little to no vibration in them, which is incredible. But even 5,000 RPMs, I barely feel any vibrations in my hand, which is crazy, because most of the time in older bikes, even my Honda CB750, which is incredibly smooth, you get vibration in your hands, even with gloves on. That's just how they are. I'm getting a little tingling in my hands, a little bit of tingling on the seat. My feet, I am wearing a little bit of a blockier shoe, but very, very minimal vibration, which is one of the things that the Suzuki was renowned for at the time. Its smoothness, its durability, and its handling aspect. And we'll get it on a back street in just a second here. And even though this bike is old, close to 50, about 45 years old or so if I'm doing the mental math right, bringing it out to, you know, 6K, the downshifts are just crazy smooth on this bike. When you look at the Suzuki GS550 from an overall package, it's incredible how good this motorcycle really is. Coming out in the late 70s and becoming almost an early 80s bike, this bike sees a lot of benefits that some of the early Japanese vintage bikes didn't have. Like the smoothness of the engine, like the smoothness around the corners. This bike was renowned for being a really good overall well-packaged machine. And now 50 years later, it's still very impressive how good the bike rides and feels, even though this isn't the cleanest example that's out there in the world. This Suzuki honestly impressed me quite a bit. I wasn't expecting it to ride as good as it did. I was actually thinking this bike was going to be slow and sluggish, but it actually gets up and goes. It moves for a 550, and I really have nothing but good to say about the bike. This bike does have a couple of weird quirks, like the gear indicator. The gear indicator never really works on almost every single bike I see for sale. The other problem I have in my bike, which I'm not sure if it's a huge problem, but these bikes have vacuum petcocks with the fuel. What that means essentially is the fact that there is no off. There is only on or reserve. Fortunately, it's failed on my bike, and it is very, very expensive to replace. So I see that as a little bit of a downside. And that's all I have for the video. If you guys did enjoy it, do me a huge favor, leave a like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content in the future. Go down and comment what your thoughts are on the 550, the 750, and other Suzuki models that you may have rode and would be interested in seeing on this channel. If you have a motorcycle for sale, don't forget to email me down below. And also, if you're interested in this bike or any of my other bikes, feel free to shoot me offers down in the same email below.